he would be pretty honest with, eventually he would be pretty honest with me about situations and the way he acted or whatever. You can't put it into words. They need to create new words for it, the feeling of loss.
For decades, the world has known Sharon and Ozzy Osbourne as rock's most chaotic, beloved, and unforgettable couple. Their wild marriage, their unbelievable fights, their reality TV fame fans saw it all. But what they never saw were the quiet moments. The ones behind closed doors. The ones Sharon has finally begun speaking about. Because now, with Ozzy's health fading and shocking new details emerging, Sharon is revealing the truth about the heartbreaking final of their life together. The public knows Ozzy as the unstoppable Prince of Darkness, a man who survived addictions, accidents, and a lifetime of chaos. But, according to Sharon, the man she sees today is someone completely different. His voice weaker, his body failing, his memory slipping. And for the first time, Sharon is openly preparing the world for something fans have feared for years. Ozzy Osbourne. Maybe nearing his final moments, she describes nights sitting beside him, listening to his breathing change, holding his hands as tremors shake through him, watching him stare at old photos of the children, quietly whispering memories only he understands. She says the hardest part isn't the pain or the sickness, it's the goodbye, slowly forming in front of her eyes. The world thinks they know Ozzy's story. But Sharon's words prove the truth is far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Long before, Ozzy Osbourne became a symbol of rock rebellion. Before the stages filled with smoke and screaming fans, Sharon saw him as something deeper. A man with remarkable strength hidden inside a fragile soul. Their story began in a whirlwind of chaos music, addiction, money, fame, and the kind of emotional storms that would have destroyed most couples. They fought, they broke, they rebuilt, and somehow through every disaster, they remained bound together. That bond now sits at the center of the heartbreaking reality Sharon faces today. Over the last few years, Ozzy's health has declined in ways neither of them could have predicted. Age moved in quietly at first, but then it struck like thunder. Parkinson's disease weakened his body, affecting balance, voice, and mobility. Multiple surgeries left him exhausted. Each operation took something that would never return confidence, strength, and independence. Sharon watched all of it from inches away. Always smiling for the world, always holding her husband's hand behind the scenes. She describes mornings when she helps Ozzy out of bed, guiding him slowly through each painful step. She talks about nights when his breathing changes, when panic rises, and she wraps her arms around him until he calms. These moments aren't the ones fans saw on television. These are the moments that changed her entire view of life. For decades, Ozzy was untouchable. He walked across stages like he owned gravity. He roared at crowds, screamed lyrics, and made an entire generation believe in the impossible. Seeing him now using walking frames, whispering instead of shouting, leaning instead of standing tall breaks Sharon in ways she can barely describe. Yet she never leaves his side. She remembers the early years when Ozzy spiraled into addiction, losing control of everything, even his own life. Sharon stood there then, too, fighting for him, protecting him, yelling at him, saving him. Back then, she believed their story would always be about survival. Today, she fears it may end in silence. For friends and family, the shift has been equally painful to witness. Their children, Kelly and Jack, recall how their father once ran around the house laughing and shouting like an eternal teenager. Now those memories feel distant. Sharon often sits with Ozzy as he looks through old photos, pointing at them slowly, tears in his eyes, struggling to describe what he feels. Sometimes he laughs. Sometimes he cries. Sometimes he closes his eyes because remembering hurts too much. Behind the cameras, there are quiet confessions, Ozzy asking Sharon if she will be okay without him, promising that he never meant to cause her pain. There are moments when he admits he is scared, not of dying, but of leaving her alone. Sharon says these conversations tear her apart. She answers with strength, telling him she will be fine, but her voice shakes every time. Their home, once loud with music and laughter, has become peaceful and careful. Every movement of Ozzy's body has become something to manage, something to protect. Nurses visit often. Doctors check his vitals. Medication fills entire cabinets. And through all of it, Sharon maintains a face of strength, yet admits that some days she collapses on her bedroom floor, sobbing where no one can see. For Ozzy, the battle is no longer about concerts or fame. It's about holding on to dignity, voice, and identity. The world still sees him as the Prince of Darkness, but Sharon sees a husband afraid to lose himself piece by piece. She watches him struggle to speak words clearly and wonders how a man who sang to millions now fights to finish a sentence. This stage of life has forced both of them to face truths they avoided for years. Their love story, once full of noise and chaos, now sits in candlelight and whispered fears. Sharon admits the hardest part isn't watching Ozzy's body decline, it's watching his mind wander into memories and silence. For the first time in their unbelievable journey, the end feels close. And Sharon knows these final moments define everything they ever were. Partners, survivors, and soulmates fighting the last together. Sharon Osbourne says, the house felt different that day, too still. Too quiet, like the walls were holding their breath. She remembers waking up before sunrise, the sky outside London a deep gray blue, and heading to Ozzy's bedroom with a cup of tea. His room had become a strange sanctuary, lit with soft lamps, rock memorabilia on the walls, and pictures of their children spread across the nightstand. Sharon said Ozzy wasn't asleep when she arrived. He was awake, staring at the ceiling with distant eyes, like he was seeing something none of them could. She sat by his side and held his hand, shocked by how cold it felt. Ozzy whispered, "Sharon, stay close today," and she knew, without anyone saying the words, what he meant. Doctors had told her weeks earlier they were losing time. His body was slowing. His breathing was getting harder. And the once unstoppable Prince of Darkness, who had commanded stadium crowds and outlived every prediction. Every scandal, every drug, every injury was now fighting to breathe while lying completely still beneath soft blankets. Sharon said she had spent years preparing for the thought of losing him. But when the moment drew closer, every breath became a knife to the heart. She told him everything would be okay. She told him she wasn't going anywhere. She whispered jokes, memories, and I love yous between tears she tried to hide. As morning turned to noon, the family began gathering. Kelly arrived first, pale and trembling, clutching Ozzy's old tour jacket like a child clings to a blanket. Jack stood beside his sister, his hand shaking as he placed it on his father's arm. They spoke to Ozzy softly, telling him how proud they were of him, how he changed their lives, how he inspired millions. Sharon said the kids were trying to be strong for her, but she could see their pain in every broken breath. She remembers Kelly whispering, "Dad, you can rest if you want," and Ozzy turning his head just slightly toward her voice, a tear sliding from the corner of his eye. That was the first moment Sharon realized he was saying goodbye without using words. Outside, fans were already leaving flowers at the gate, unaware that their hero was taking his final steps inside. His team, his nurses, his closest friends stood in the halls, silent. No one played music. No one filled the space with noise. The silence was unbearable, Sharon said, because Ozzy had been noise his whole life, laughing, singing, joking, shouting, swearing, living loudly. Seeing him silent was like watching a star burn out. Around 3 p.m., Ozzy suddenly reached for Sharon's hand again with surprising strength. She leaned in close. His breathing was heavy but controlled. He whispered something she will never forget. "Don't let them forget the real me." Sharon felt her heart break open. She told him no one ever could. She said the world knew his soul, not just his music, and that he had already become immortal. Ozzy closed his eyes again, and for a long moment they thought he had drifted to sleep. But then he took a long, shaky breath and whispered, "I'm sorry for the pain." Sharon stopped him immediately. She pressed her forehead to his and said, "You gave us life. You gave us everything." The nurse checked his pulse quietly and told Sharon his heart was weakening. Sharon looked at the clock, 3:47 p.m. She held his face in her hands, telling him she loved him again and again. Jack and Kelly leaned against the bed, crying softly. Ozzy's breathing became slower, each inhale longer than the last. Sharon said she could feel the world narrowing, shrinking into that single room. She remembers thinking, this can't be happening, not to him, not to Ozzy. But it was happening. Their entire lives were circling these final seconds. Just before sunset, Ozzy opened his eyes one last time and looked at Sharon. She swears there was peace in them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand squeezed hers gently. Then the pressure loosened. And Sharon Osbourne realized the love of her life had slipped away. Sharon remembers the moment after. Ozzy took his last breath as the loudest silence she had ever heard. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared at him, her hands still wrapped around his, waiting for anything to happen. She said it felt like her soul had been ripped from inside her chest, yet she couldn't cry. Kelly was the first to break. She fell forward over her father's chest, sobbing into the blankets, whispering no. No, no. Over and over again. Jack stepped back from the bed, shaking his head, wiping tears away with trembling fingers, unable to breathe. Sharon sat between them, staring into Ozzy's still face, memorizing every freckle, every wrinkle, every piece of him she wished she could hold on to forever. Doctors checked his pulse one last time, then quietly stepped away. They didn't need to say anything. The room already knew. For a long time, nobody spoke. They sat in that room, listening to the faint hum of machines that no longer mattered. Sharon ran her fingers through Ozzy's hair, whispering a prayer she didn't even know she remembered. She said she hoped God understood that she wasn't angry at death. She was just shocked that it had finally found a man who had outrun it for decades. This was the same Ozzy who survived addiction, crashes, broken bones, overdoses, surgeries, and every self-destructive hurricane imaginable. Somehow, she thought he would escape this too. She used to joke that Ozzy wasn't human, that he was made of pure electricity, burning too loud to ever dim. Now she looked at him and saw stillness where chaos once lived. Eventually, Sharon stood up. She kissed Ozzy's forehead, whispering, "Thank you for choosing me." She didn't remember standing, didn't remember walking, but suddenly she was in the hallway, supported by Kelly and Jack on either side. Friends and staff looked at her with wide eyes. They knew the air changed. Phones began ringing. Doors opened and closed quietly. People hugged without speaking. Sharon walked slowly down the hall, her legs barely working, like she was learning how to exist in a world without the man who shaped every part of her life. She described the feeling as grief mixed with disbelief, like her mind refused to update the reality she had lived in since she was 18. The family gathered in the living room where pictures of Ozzy filled every wall. Sharon sat on the couch staring at the front door, imagining him bursting through it again, shouting for coffee, complaining about the dog. Turning on heavy metal at 7 a.m., she could still hear his laugh echoing in the corners of the house. She said she realized then that grief isn't quiet. It screams inside your body. Every memory sharpened at once. The first time she saw him backstage, his messy long hair and crooked smile. The way he held her hand during births, funerals, tours, storms, scandals. The way he always whispered "good night, my Sharon," even on nights when he could barely speak. Kelly curled up beside her mother, holding her tightly. Jack stood by the window staring into the rain, saying nothing because there was nothing left to say. Someone brought tea. Someone lit candles. Someone else turned photos face down because they couldn't bear to look. Hours passed, but time felt meaningless. Sharon tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ozzy's final breath replaying like an endless loop. She wondered if she had done enough. She wondered if he felt pain. She wondered if she should have asked him one more question, told him one more secret, or played him one more song. That torment, she admitted, would never fully leave her. Late that night, after everyone else had finally drifted into exhausted silence, Sharon walked back to Ozzy's room alone. She sat beside him again, brushing the blanket smooth, whispering apologies for being away even just a few hours. She talked to him like he was still listening. She told him about the kids, about the candles, about the rain outside, and she promised him she would protect his legacy with the same fierce love she protected their marriage. She rested her head on his chest and cried until she couldn't breathe, and then she whispered a sentence that shattered her. "Good night, my love." She turned off the lamp, leaving the room in gentle darkness, and closed the door behind her, knowing she would never open it the same way again. In the days following Ozzy's passing, Sharon described waking up every morning with a moment of peace before the truth slammed into her chest like a hammer. That first breath after sleep felt normal until memory struck. She would open her eyes and, for a split second, expect to hear Ozzy shouting something absurd from downstairs or laughing at morning television. But then silence answered and reality poured over her, cold and crushing. She said nothing prepared her for the way grief blends into routine. Simple acts like brushing teeth, pouring coffee, or folding laundry suddenly felt impossible. Every movement in the house reminded her of him. His jacket still hung on a chair. His toothbrush sat untouched. His slippers waited near the bed as if expecting his feet to return. Sharon said the house didn't feel empty because people were missing, it felt empty. Because laughter was missing. Friends visited constantly. Flowers covered every flat surface. Phone calls came from every country on earth. Thousands of fans stood outside the gates, holding candles, chanting Ozzy's lyrics, whispering prayers. And even though Sharon appreciated every gesture, each reminder of how loved he was made the hole in her heart ache deeper. She said she had no idea how much weight Ozzy carried in the world until she saw how many people collapsed emotionally at his death. She wasn't mourning just her husband, she was mourning a global force. But at the same time, she quietly confessed that part of her wanted the world to go away. She didn't want to share him anymore. She wanted to curl up in a corner, hold his shirts to her chest, and cry without cameras or reporters, waiting to capture her pain. The memorial planning became a battle between grief and duty. Ozzy had always been clear, he wanted music, he wanted energy, he wanted love, not a choir in silence. Sharon honored that. She sat at the dining table, surrounded by family, choosing songs between tears. They'd picked the ones he hummed backstage and the ones he used to scream out windows on long drives. Sharon refused to choose sad music only, she wanted his funeral to feel like him, chaotic and beautiful. They found old recordings of Ozzy laughing, and she decided those laughs would play through the speakers, echoing through the hall, so every person attending would hear the joy before the sorrow. Then came the moment she had to choose, the clothes he would be buried in. Sharon opened his closet slowly, her hand trailing along heavy coats and stage costumes. Each outfit told a story. Concerts, tours, scandals, interviews, holidays, victories, relapses, recoveries. She finally pulled out a jacket he wore on their last anniversary. She held it to her face and whispered, "This one." She chose his favorite rings, the ones he never removed, and slipped them into a small velvet box. She said the hardest part was choosing the boots, because Ozzy always joked he wanted to be comfortable even in death. Eventually, she sat down on the carpet, surrounded by clothes, and sobbed into her hands. When the public memorial began, Sharon walked into the hall with her children beside her. The moment she saw his portrait projected on the wall, young Ozzy with wild hair, bright eyes, and a grin that looked ready to start trouble, her knees almost buckled. Kelly took her hand. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. Sharon steadied herself. The guests stood and applauded when she entered, not out of celebration, but respect. She later admitted those applause felt like goodbye. 1,000 people filled the room, but she heard nothing. All sound blurred into a low hum as she stared at Ozzy's smiling image. When it was her turn to speak, Sharon approached the podium slowly. Papers trembled in her hands, though she could barely see them through the blur of tears. She didn't talk about fame or awards. She didn't list achievements or numbers. She spoke about the man at home, the Ozzy who left sticky notes on the fridge that made no sense. The Ozzy who cried over puppies. The Ozzy who said he wasn't good enough even when the world worshipped him. The Ozzy who held her hand every night like it was the last. She told the crowd he was her greatest adventure. People wept openly. After the memorial, Sharon and the kids took a private moment alone beside his resting place. There were no cameras, no reporters, no lights. Sharon placed her hand on the casket and whispered, "Wait for me." She didn't mean soon. She meant someday. She tucked a small letter beneath his handwords she never revealed to the public. Then she kissed the wood and stepped back, unable to stay any longer. In the car ride home, no one spoke. Ozzy's music played quietly on the radio, one of his softer songs. Sharon stared out the window, watching the city blur past, thinking to herself that life had changed in a single breath. She said loss doesn't end when the funeral does. It follows you into every morning, every conversation, every meal. But she also said she felt him near her, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as love. Endless, stubborn love. And even through the heartbreak, Sharon promised she would keep living as Ozzy taught her to, loud, fearless, and unapologetically herself. Because grief might break the heart, but love builds the pieces back together.